All right, well, here's the thing. I want to introduce Patrick Yanke. He's going to be speaking to us next. Great guy, great friend of mine. He's going to talk to you about servant leadership. I'm excited to hear his presentation and get him going. Come on up, Patrick. There you go.
Thank you, Marcus, and that was outstanding, as always. Humbled to be here in the room that I'm in with the people I get to speak with today, and the people I get to speak to. The New America Seminar on Leadership is doing wonderful things. And so what is my role here, and where am I from? And I'm a person who's experienced leadership from multiple perspectives. Started out actually in the Army, went to the Air Force, came into private industry, and I've experienced leadership from many perspectives, public and private, and world class. So it's interesting when you look at what's commonalities between leadership roles. And as Marcus said, there's a number of principles of leadership that are fairly fundamental to everything that we do. Everyone's going to have their own perspective on leadership, their own take on leadership, but you're going to find a lot of the same principles. When I went to the Army, one thing that really impressed me about the way the Army functions is everything is focused on that recruit right there in front of you. And when you are going to the chow line, when you're bedding down for the night, the officers, the NCOs, they're making sure that the lowest recruits are taken care of before they're taken care of. You know, that's... got a presentation going. It's gonna slide ahead on me. But that's part of their culture is to make sure that the troop there is taken care of first. So what we end up with is a situation where the officers and NCOs will put themselves last and put their troops first. That's the style of leadership in the Army. And for those that are moderating the presentation, don't worry about it. It's not working the way it should, so don't try to keep up with me. Just skip the presentation. So when you go to the Air Force, and being kind of a glutton for punishment, I did basic training in the Army, and thought it was so much fun, I thought I'd do it again. So I went to the Air Force Academy, got to experience basic cadet training, and it's a very similar style of leadership, but when you get onto the Air Force, what you find is that a lot of the energy that's focused on leadership is focused on the officer. And you get this air crew, they're flying a C-17, they come into a base, and they get to the base, the enlisted go their way, the officers go their way, they're getting their crew rest, and they basically take care of themselves. So the officers aren't necessarily making sure that the enlisted are taken care of before they take care of themselves. But the mindset there is still actually very much the same. Because what they're trying to do is to take care of their warfighters. Because in the Army, your warfighters are the guy in the trenches. They're the guys with the rifles. They're looking out there at the enemy, and they're staring down where they're going to have to go the next day. In the Air Force, a lot of your warfighters are the officers that are in the cockpits and need their crew rest so they can fly an 18-hour mission that's going to take them halfway around the world to fight the fight. You've got to take care of your warfighters. And in any organization, you're going to find that about 10% of your organization is actually focused directly on contact with the enemy and directly on the mission. The other 90% are focused on a support role. And that doesn't make them any less to the mission. They're essential to the mission, but you still got to take care of your warfighters. So we get this image of military training where Hollywood likes to show a full metal jacket. We like to see officer and a gentleman getting in people's faces, belittling them, making them feel small, and makes for a good Hollywood movie, but that's not what the military is about. That's not what basic training is about. It's about instilling a culture into this person. Any Marine out there understands another Marine because they came through Camp Lejeune. Any Army person out there understands because they came through Army basic training, and every Air Force person understands each other because they came through Air Force basic training. We have our own languages, we have our own culture. It's instilling that culture into those recruits. So we may come from rural America, we may come from urban America, we may come from poor backgrounds or rich backgrounds, but we're all going to funnel through that training that breaks down the individual and makes you part of the team and brings you into that culture. That's the nature of that training. So as much as we have those depictions of military training that show the harsh side of it, one thing that was beaten into us at the Air Force Academy very strongly, and I say beaten in, we had to memorize it, is a quote by John M. Schofield. And he gave this quote to the graduating class at West Point in 1879. This is very much a part of military culture. The discipline which makes the soldiers of a free country reliable in battle is not to be gained by harsh or tyrannical treatment. On the contrary, such treatment is far more likely to destroy than to make an army. It is possible to impart instruction and give commands in such a manner, in such a tone of voice, as to inspire in the soldier no feeling but an intense desire to obey, while the opposite manner and tone of voice cannot fail to excite strong resentment and a desire to disobey. The one mode or the other of dealing with subordinates springs from a corresponding spirit in the breast of the commander. He who feels and hence manifests the respect that is due to others inspires respect for himself. He who feels and hence manifests disrespect toward others, especially the subordinates, inspires hatred against himself. That corresponding spirit in the breast of the commander. That's what military training is about. When a drill instructor is looking at that recruit and says, "You're crawling through the mud right now because I crawled through the mud." And when that recruit looks up at that drill sergeant and says, "I'm crawling through the mud because someday I want to be like you," that's that corresponding spirit. I am where I am because I was where you are. And you are where you are because someday you're going to be where I am. The number one job of a leader is making sure that they are training the leaders of tomorrow. If there's no succession in leadership, there's no organizational longevity. Your organization will die. That is the role of a leader, is to bring that person up, to make sure that, yes, I understand exactly where you are because I was there, but there is a goal and a purpose for this. And you explain that goal and purpose. So that person who's crawling through the mud looks up and says, I know what my goal and purpose is because I see it in you. That's the inspiration. So to understand some of my philosophies a little bit on leadership, I want to take a little bit of a delve into human nature. Because a lot of leadership simply comes from human nature. That's why it's so ubiquitously applicable to all of us, is that it's part of who we are. And we're emotional beings. You know, we have our emotions that drive us, and emotional decisions tend to drive us more in the short term than the long term, but those short-term decisions have huge impact. When we look at the emotions, when psychologists categorize the emotions, and of course there's lots of different ways you can categorize emotions, but there were 6 primary emotions. You had joy, we all like joy. You had anger, sadness, you have disgust, you have fear, and you had surprise. Years later, they looked at it and they said, actually, when you break this down, disgust is a subset of anger, and surprise is really a subset of fear. So there's 4 main emotions. Now we've got joy, anger, sadness, and fear. And when you break it down even further, and you say, put electrodes on people's faces and say, how do people react to stimulus? How do they react to anger? How do they react to sadness? You find that even anger and sadness are also subsets of fear. And we see that in the animal kingdom. You know, we are animals ourselves. And in the animal kingdom, when you see an animal bristled up against a wall, is that animal angry at you? Is that animal sad? Or is that animal scared? And typically, that animal is scared, but it's presenting an attitude of anger because that's its way out of this situation. When you see an animal cowering in the corner and unable to raise its eyes, is that animal sad or is that animal afraid? It's typically afraid. We have those same emotions, and we go from a spectrum primarily of fear to joy. But we don't necessarily act out of joy. We act out of love. So now that spectrum, in terms of how we react to the world, is really a question of fear and love. And what we find when we look deeply into fear and love is that love is external. Love is something you give. You tell me you're not loved, I tell you you can love more. Because love is outgoing. It's what we can do for others. It's how we look at the world. It's what we give to everyone else. It's self-giving. Fear, on the other hand, is internal. It's worried about, what do I have to lose? What is this going to cost me? Fear is a selfish emotion by its nature. And as much as we make our long-term plans and we say, well, this is where I want to be 5, 10 years from now, why do we have a hard time reaching our goals? It's because of those next 5 minutes when you're going to make multiple decisions, and they're going to be made on fear and love. You know, the problem with fear is that it's not this great grandiose thriller movie fear, someone's coming at me with a knife all the time. A lot of times it's, I'm afraid of my own success. And that's what holds us back. If I do this, more is going to be expected of me. I don't think I'm ready for more to be expected of me, so it holds me back in what I do today. And because it holds you back in what you do today, we don't tend to reach our goals. Very few of us react completely out of love in everything that we do, but if we did, I think we can all imagine what the world would look like if everything that we did, we acted out of love. But we don't. We're a selfish people. We worry about what we have to lose. We worry about our reputations. We worry about the things that we don't have, that we worry that we may never have. So those are the decisions that we make in the short term. We have a choice to make. In every decision we make, a choose to love or a choose to fear and act in fear. Now, it also gets turned around. It works the opposite way. A selfish person tends to be a fearful person. Because in that selfishness, like King Midas counting his gold, in that selfishness is the fear of losing what it is that I'm selfish about and what I have. Where a giving person is a loving person by nature. It works both ways. So those that are living in that selfishness are full of fear, and those that are fearful are selfish. But those that are living in love are giving, and giving people are expressing love. So a little basic philosophy to understand where I'm going with this. Let's talk about leadership and how it pertains. The core of everything a leader does is the mission. The mission is purpose. The mission is why you started this business, this organization, this plan that you've got going. The mission is about what you do and why you do it. It is your why. It's how you got out of bed this morning. We got a lot of buzzwords these days where we say that safety is job one. Really? If safety is job one, send your people home, have them get in bed, they're safe. That is not job one. The mission is job one. And we have to focus on that mission to understand why it is that we're here, why it is we're doing what we're doing, and how we're going to lead people to accomplish that goal. So focus on that mission and say, why am I here? What is my purpose in what I'm doing? And when you fully understand your purpose, that itself starts to drive the rest of the equation. That's the nature of it. And part of understanding your mission is recognizing that every organization comes into being to fill a need. If you're not filling a need, you're not going to stay in business. We had a question when Marcus was talking about how do you survive in a saturated marketplace? You do it by filling a need. And sometimes you've got to be very focused in that need. If your marketplace is saturated, then you get down in that niche and you say, what need can I fill that only I can fill? What can I do that only I can do? That's where that mission lies. But you have to understand your industry. You have to understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. I love, a friend of mine many years ago who's very much into the golf world, told me this story. And I think it's Ben Hogan, but please don't quote me on the golfer on this. But he's playing this round of golf. It's for a major tournament. He gets down to the 18th hole. He's staring down. It's possible to make it to the green, but it's a very long shot. And he's trying to make his decision, do I go for it or do I not go for it? Meanwhile, the announcers are looking at the situation and saying, okay, so he has a possibility to get it up on the green, but if he doesn't get it on the green, if he puts it in the water, he loses the tournament. So the smart play is here, he needs to lay it up, and he needs to put it on the green, force a playoff, and he has a chance to win the tournament. And he's still standing there, and he's smoking a cigarette. You can tell how long ago that was. And he's smoking a cigarette, and he's looking at this shot. Finally, he flicks the cigarette. He grabs the club, lines up on his shot, whacks the ball, and it goes in the water. And he loses the tournament. And afterward, the announcers come up to him in the locker room and they're saying, what were you thinking? How could you do that? You could have won the tournament, at least had a chance at it, forced a playoff, do the layup. And Ben Hogan looked at him very earnestly. Some cuss words involved, but I won't. And he says, who am I? And the announcer looks at him and says, well, you're Ben Hogan. Who am I? You're Ben Hogan. That's right. Those people out there came to see Ben Hogan. I gave them Ben Hogan. That's a man who understands his industry and his mission. He understands that his mission is not playing golf. Golf is just a means to an end. His mission is entertainment. The people didn't come out today to see him have a perfect round of golf. They came out today to watch what he's famous for, and that is going at it with his whole heart, trying for everything that he could get, taking the tough shot. He understands his industry. On the flip side is Kodak. Now, depending on generations, you may or may not remember the name Kodak. At one point, they were a name synonymous with good picture taking. They pioneered much of camera technology and the slates and things that were used early on. And for 10 years, they led the industry in imaging. And they got very into their products. They had their imaging screens, they had their cameras, they had the Polaroids, and they had all these things that were very important to them. And the bean counters came in. And the bean counters said, all of these products are making us a lot of money. And the engineers came in and said, yes, but we've developed this new thing called a digital camera. Take the whole industry to a new level. The bean counters said, yes, but you'll compete with our own products and won't be able to sell our film and everything else that we do. And the bean counters won. And they shelved the digital camera. They were one of the early pioneers. Kodak went bankrupt. And they went bankrupt because they forgot their mission. Their mission was imaging. Their mission was great pictures. Their mission was making sure that the average consumer could take great shots of their family, but they got wedded to their products. They lost sight of their mission and got more focused on their products, and they went bankrupt. Now, I'm happy to say that they came out of bankruptcy, but they're a shadow of themselves for what they used to be. They could have been the industry leader when it came to imaging all the way through if they had continued to innovate. And that's that focus on the mission that recognizes what it is and why you do it. You'll do that when you are focused on what that mission is and you understand what your purpose is. Mission is purpose. It's why you're here. And if you as a leader are not focused on that mission and purpose, no one else will be either. And the job won't get done. And negative outcomes occur. Wrapped around the mission are the people. You can't be a leader if you're not leading anybody. You can understand leadership, but if you're not leading anybody, you can't be a leader. So it's up to you to bring in the people that you think most align with that mission. That's the selection process when it comes to who you're going to hire. It starts at the entrance to your company to say, is this a good fit to make sure I can do the mission? Is this somebody that I think will sign up to the mission of my company? That's the selection process. It's the people that you bring in. It's the working clay that you're going to work with in leadership. That's where it starts. So, I want you to write down the letter C. The letter C is for communication. Because the first thing that a leader has to do is communicate with the people. You're the one that has the mission. You're the one that set this company up, or you're the one that's at least in charge now. You have to share that vision with the people you're leading. If they don't understand where you're going, they can't get there with you. And they can't take the company there with you. And you're going to end up leaving them behind, or at least have a bifurcation in your organization. You don't want your organization getting split from people who understand the mission and people that don't. So you have to communicate. You have to make sure everyone understands. The challenge that I put to anybody is go to a janitor in your organization. Go to the cleaning staff. Do they understand why they're important to the mission? Do they understand what the mission of your organization is? If they don't, then they're not contributing to the mission. They're simply sweeping the floors. That's a test of your communication skills. Does the lowest person understand what the mission of this company is? Are they on board with what the mission of this company is? But communication is a two-way street. A two-way street that says, I need to hear from my people too. How many of us say that we have an open door policy? We all say it. But do you really? Do you really want to hear what those people say? As Marcus said, part of the reason of his downfall was not listening to someone who had a very important message to give that was a very truthful and honest message. The people that you have working for you have impressions on how they accomplish the mission as well. If we don't listen to them, we don't innovate. If you think you're the only person in this organization that has the right ideas, then you're doomed to failure. Because the most important thing you're going to do with the people that you have is hire the right people in the right positions that are going to complement your own inadequacies. We all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses. And we as leaders need to understand, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? I can do my strengths for this company, but I need to hire other people that are going to come along and they're going to make up for my weaknesses. And because they're my weaknesses, I need to listen to them when they have ideas on where this company should go and how it should get there. Communication is fundamental to being a leader. I'll give you a story from my time in the Air Force, actually. I told you I went to the Air Force Academy, and like a lot of folks who go to the Air Force Academy, I intended to fly. That was my dream. I wanted to be a Thunderbird pilot eventually down the road. I wanted to fly through the sky with my hair on fire. That looked like what I wanted to do with my life. It didn't work that way because I graduated in 1993, and if you know your history of the Middle East, that was the drawdown from the Gulf War. We had ramped everything up for a couple of years. We had the Gulf War. We needed less pilots. We needed fewer pilots. We didn't have the cockpits available. My class was the first one from the Air Force Academy that when you graduated and you were pilot qualified, you didn't have an automatic pilot slot waiting for you somewhere out there. Go find something else that you can do in the Air Force. I ended up in food service. And I will admit, I was a disgruntled pilot, not a food service officer initially. I didn't go into it with the gusto that maybe I should have because this isn't what I dreamed for my life. And who am I surrounded by? Unfortunately, a lot of people had kind of the same reason for being there. There are people that go into the Air Force that say, I want to go into food service, and they want the training, they want the experience, they understand what food service is about, and that's what they want to do. Unfortunately, you also get the folks that washed out of other career fields that food service is what they had available. And I was kind of that leader as well. But I also understood the importance of the position. I understood the importance of the mission. And one thing that I would always stress to my people is, you're looking at pots and pans. You're looking at rice and beans. That's not your mission. If we deploy with the wing over to the Middle East and we forget the bombs and bullets, what's going to happen? We're going to say, please send us the bombs and bullets. We can't go on a mission until those get here. If we deploy without the food, what's going to happen? We're going home. But we're at least going to get a higher priority to get the food there before we even get the bombs and bullets. That's how important you are to the mission. And that's what they had to understand. And that's what I, as a leader, had to convey to them, was their role in this mission and why it's so important to the overall job. And they had to understand that they're not just a food service worker. They are mission essential to getting the mission done. That's one of the misnomers that I find with the current COVID environment is not essential versus non-essential. It's hard to describe what is essential and non-essential from a central location. Essential and non-essential is in the eye of the beholder. And it's essential to that person working at that restaurant that they're able to feed their family and pay their bills and do the things they need to do. You have to understand the essential role that everyone plays in the economy as a whole, and especially in your own organization. And if you understand the role that they play, then you can explain to them how it is they relate. Write down the letter A. A is accompaniment. It's not enough to tell them what the mission is. It's not enough to tell them how they fit into the mission. Now you have to go along with them. This is a journey that you're going to take together. You're not just going to tell them, go take that hill. You're going to take that hill with them. You're not just going to tell them that floor needs to be swept, and if they're not there, it doesn't happen. You're going to have to sweep the floor sometimes too. You're not going to tell them there are jobs in this company that you're not willing to do. That's why I hired you to do it. Now go over there and do that because I'm not willing to do it. No, I am willing to do it because it's an essential job. I hired you to do it because it's essential. And if you're not here, I have to do it. Therefore, you're doing it simply because I need someone to do that so I can focus on the strategic vision for this company. But what they do is important and essential, or they wouldn't be there. So there's no jobs in your organization that are not worthwhile. There's no jobs in the organization that are beneath you, because if you give that impression that there are jobs in this organization that are beneath you, then I promise you, the people are going to look up at you and say, you're beneath them because you don't recognize how important their job is. And they're also going to look at you and they're going to question whether or not you understand the essential worth of every human being. People that have a sense of self-worth, well, hopefully these are the people you're hiring because those are the best people to have around you. If they have a sense of self-worth, then they recognize whether or not they're valued. And they'll know whether or not they're valued by whether or not you're willing to accompany them on this journey. Or if you're simply that person that calls from vacation in Barbados and says, hey, how's the job going today? If you've been there, you understand what a slap in the face that is. You have to accompany the people on the journey. You have to go with them to accomplish the mission. And if you're not willing to go with them to accomplish the mission, then you need to make sure that they understand what it is you're doing to accomplish the mission alongside them. That general that's sitting on a horse looking at the battlefield, he's not down there on the front line because you don't want your general killed in the first wave of combat. You want the general to be able to adjust to what happens on the battlefield. But that general is on the battlefield. And that soldier on the front line is comforted to know that that general is on the battlefield. He is looking at what's happening out here, and he will adjust the plan. But when they see that general go down, then they know the battle plan's over. And we're in trouble here. So they want to know you're there with them on the journey. You're there with them on the battlefield. You're trying to accomplish the mission. So let's talk about that open door policy. Talked about in communication how we say we want an open door policy. In accompaniment, that's where the open door policy really comes into practical application. You say you have an open door policy, but if they don't see you as a fellow human being, if you've held yourself out as somebody who's above everybody else, you have no faults, you don't even appear to be human, are you approachable? Do people really feel like they could knock on your door and interrupt what you're doing, or are you someone special in this organization who's not to be touched, who's not to be interrupted, who's not to be moved? That's the open door policy. That's the accompaniment. Let them see your mistakes. Let them know that you are human. Because you know they're going to make mistakes because you made mistakes. You didn't get to where you are by being born a CEO. You got to where you are by making mistakes along the way. Allow them to make mistakes, but more importantly, allow them to see that you make mistakes. Let them see that you are human. Because if you're not human, you're not approachable. And if you're not approachable, you're not with them on the journey. You're not accompanying them. Write down the letter R. R is for responsibility. You can't delegate responsibility. Whatever happens in this organization is on you. But you can hire people that are going to help you accomplish the mission. And how many levels of leadership below you depends on the size of your organization. So you might have leaders who report to you, and you're going to delegate some responsibility to them to say, you're responsible for this task. But if that task doesn't get done, who's it on? Yeah, you're going to take it out on them, but it's still on you because you're in charge of the organization. You can't delegate away your responsibility, but you can give some of that responsibility to somebody else and make them responsible for a task. But here's the key. In giving responsibility, you are also giving them the ability to fail. If you don't give someone the ability to fail, you haven't given them real responsibility. If you don't give them the ability to make decisions, they don't have real responsibility. If they have to knock on your door or send you an email or a text every time there's an important decision to be made, they don't have real responsibility. That's key. Because people need to understand that in their role in this organization, they're allowed to make decisions. And everyone's going to come across decisions. Even the person standing at the front desk who's dealing with that customer has decisions to make about customer service. And they need to understand what are the boundaries. Obviously, they can't commit the company to doing things that are outside the scope of the company. But if they can satisfy that customer within their scope of responsibility, allow them to do it. When they have to call you with every decision, they're not empowered. They don't feel responsible. And frankly, they don't feel that they're growing in their responsibilities. Looking back at that troop that's in the mud looking at the drill sergeant, Are you growing? You want to get out of the mud and you want to be that drill sergeant. You want to get out of the mud. You want to be that officer. Are you growing? You only grow with real responsibility. You have to be able to make decisions. You have to have the ability to fail in order to learn from your mistakes and become that leader of tomorrow. If you never allow someone to make a mistake, you never allow them to grow. And if you never allow them to see that you make mistakes, you never allow them to see that you're human. Responsibility is extremely important for a leader to understand that buck stops with you. But because that buck stops with you, it's up to you as a leader to provide that responsibility to someone else and allow them to do what they're capable of in growth. And because you allow them at the lowest level to take responsibility, make mistakes, and grow, they'll move to that next level, and they'll make bigger decisions and potentially bigger mistakes. But they'll learn from those too, and they'll grow. And that is how you grow the leaders of tomorrow, so that you don't have to be the only person who's in charge of your organization that knows what's going on, and if you go away, the organization fails. That's not a healthy organization. That's not a healthy relationship. Write down the letter E. E is for evolve. There's going to be an evolution in this business, whatever business is that you do. There's going to be an evolution as you come in contact with customers and you come in contact with, in the military, the enemy. It's that fog of war. You're going to make your plans, and then you're going to have contact with an actual customer. You're going to have a conflict with someone. And how are you going to respond to that? You're going to have to evolve. You're going to have to evolve the way you do business. You're going to have to evolve the way that you handle problems. And part of that evolution is recognizing technology. I mentioned Kodak earlier. Recognizing that the way you did business 5 years ago is not the way you're going to do business now, is not the way you're going to do business 5 years from now. Where we are in this COVID environment, the way you did business last year is not the way you're doing business this year, is likely not the way you're going to do business next year. You have to evolve. And you, as the leader, are the one that guides the evolution. You make the plans for the organization. You see the strategic vision. You see what it is that your company has to offer, and you make sure that your evolution keeps that company relevant to your customers. But there's another aspect to evolution: yourself. You have to grow. As a leader, you can't say, I'm here, I don't need any more education, I got to where I am, and life is good. If you don't continue to educate yourself, to grow yourself, to build that personal growth within yourself, you're not setting the example for others, and you're not going to be prepared to lead the organization into the next generation. You also have to evolve your people. You have to be willing to invest in them. They need education. They need the tools to do their job. You gave them responsibility for a task, but do they have the tools that they need to do it? As your company grows and your resources grow, you're able to provide better tools. These are not cost-saving bean counter measures. These are, we're able to do our job better with better tools. We're going to invest in the tools that our people need and the training that our people need so they can do the best job possible for this organization. Because if you have no desire to be the best at what you do, if you have no desire for this organization to be the best at what it does, you're not going to succeed. You can succeed for a short time, but you won't succeed in the long term, because it's all about the focus. It's about that focus on evolution and growth and moving forward and advancing the plans of the company, the technology of the company, the organizational structure of the company. Are you going to be there forever? Do you have plans to be there forever? I don't think any of us have plans to be here anywhere forever. But recognize that many people come into leadership roles as a stepping stone. I want this job because I really want that job. And this job will get me to that job. When you have that kind of a mindset, that stepping stone job tends to be very secondary in your mindset to your eventual goal. And if you're in that organization that's led by that stepping stone leader, you can tell when you're an afterthought. You can tell when this person's focused strictly on moving up to the C-suite. They're not really focused on the managerial position they have now. Part of that evolution is that succession plan. Part of that evolution is that training plan, identifying those future leaders, having a way forward that if something happens to me, whether a good thing like a promotion or a bad thing like I get hurt or worse, who's going to take my position? Who's going to carry this company forward? If you truly care about this company, if you truly care about this organization, these are the things that you're going to do to make sure that this company stays in business after you. But if it's all about you, great businesses tend to go out of business without that inspired leader, unless that inspired leader was inspired enough to invest in the future of that organization, invest in the leaders of tomorrow. That's that evolution, making sure that your people are prepared, one, to do the job that they have today, but two, to move into that leadership role and take over your job in the future. The best thing a leader can do is to see the success of their people. And part of seeing that success is making sure you acknowledge it. Acknowledge the success of the people that work for you. We've all worked for people that are afraid of other people's success. We're threatened by that. Where they say, I may be the leader, but this guy's surpassing me. He looks like he's doing better than me. I don't want the bosses to see that this guy's better than me. And so they dump on them, or they hold them back, or they won't offer them promotions. They know they're doing all the work, so they're going to keep giving them all the work, but they're not going to give them the credit because they're going to outshine them. That is a bad leader. Because what you should do is to build that person up. Recognize the talents that they have. And are they going to soar higher than you? They just might. But if you're focused on the mission, if you're focused on the organization, if you're focused on what needs to be done, then you're going to want them to do their best to grow and even surpass you when the time comes. Part of that evolution is recognizing where you are now, your strengths and weaknesses. You have them, and they may not be as great as others. You may have greater strengths in one area than another person, but you might also have greater weaknesses. And those weaknesses might mean that you're not prepared for that next level, but that person is. And do you choose to hold them back, or do you just choose to move them forward? That's your job as a leader, is to move them forward, allow them to grow as much as they're able to grow. Your success as a leader is how well you grow your people and prepare them for the future. Write down the letter S. The letter S is for service. That seems kind of redundant. We're talking servant leadership, and the letter S is for service. But this is where it all comes together. Because service, when we look back at the love and fear spectrum, service is that outward look from yourself that says, how can I help you? How can I raise you up? What can I do for you? And in this COVID environment, I hope people are doing that, because people have a great deal of needs out there. If those at the top that are not as affected by COVID are not reaching down to those at the bottom who are highly affected by COVID, you've got a problem in your organization. And I promise you, the people at the bottom see that problem. And that problem will grow and fester. It'll become a cancer in your organization. You have to serve. You have to reach down, bring that person into your office and say, what do you need? That's that communication skill again, but now it's from a service standpoint. How can I serve you? I need that communication, yes, to know how this organization can do better, but what can I as the leader do to make your job better? Heck, to make your life better. You know, when people are in financial straits, you run the risk that they could become a risk to you and your business, your organization. Someone may want to buy secrets off the organization. They may want to steal some of the things you've got in your organization. And guess what? If someone's in deep financial straits, it's tempting. They become a risk. You don't want people in those situations. You want to help them out of their personal problems as well as their business problems. You don't want them to be a risk to the organization and themselves. If you respond out of that corresponding spirit in the breast of the commander and reach out to that person and make sure that their needs are met, they're more likely to turn around and make sure that the organization's needs are met. You as a leader have to serve. You have to reach down to that person and make sure that they have what they need. I'd love to give an example of all of these principles of leadership. Joshua Chamberlain, Lieutenant Colonel Joshua Chamberlain. How am I doing on time? How am I doing on time?
You're doing great.
Oh, okay, good. Thought the hook was coming. But Lieutenant Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, he's I've always been a history buff, and he's one of my favorite leaders in all of history. And in the Civil War, at the Battle of Gettysburg, he was given the task, the responsibility of holding the left flank for the Union line at Little Round Top. And he went out there with his men, and of course, what does the enemy want to do? The enemy wants to flank the Union position. So they're trying to get around that left flank. They're trying to break the Union position. So Joshua Chamberlain's out there with his people. He's told them what the mission is. We don't have a chance to retreat. We have no choice. If we don't hold this line, our line collapses. This is not a retreat situation. This is our mission. We must hold this line. They repel the enemy first time the enemy comes at them. Next time the enemy comes at them, they repel them again. This happens all day until such time as they're out of bullets. It's been that kind of a fight. They're out of bullets. And what does Joshua Chamberlain do? Does he say, well, we're out of bullets. No, nothing else we can do? No. He recognizes his mission is we have to hold the line. His people know the mission is we have to hold the line. His people are in line with him. They're accompanying him on this journey and saying we have to hold this line. They have fixed bayonets. He draws his sword, and they charge the enemy down the field. And they end up rounding up about 600 of the enemy. And they held the Union line. That's what a leader does. It inspires greatness from people, but it's greatness tied to the mission. So you take the letters you've written down, that C, the A, the R, the E, the S, and the bottom line is a servant leader cares. A servant leader cares about the mission and the people. And if you can care about the people and the mission, you're going to find your way through. It's going to guide you in these principles to do the right thing. And that's what should be your watchword. Your watchword should be to do that next right thing when you don't know what else has to be done, just the next right thing, to care about the organization and care about the people you work with. And at that point, I think I'd open up to some questions.
Yeah, Patrick, I have a question. So when you talk about servant leadership, you talk a lot about people, the responsibility. Can you give a personal story, maybe from some stuff you've done, like in corporate space, that you had to really, show that servant leadership and how to kind of give people an example of how they kind of tie into who you are, what you've done?
So the question is, giving an example of leadership from my past where I really showed responsibility. And while you were speaking, something came to mind, and we'll see how well this is relevant or not, but it came to mind. There was a time when I was at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and I was still kind of in that food service realm. I was a combat support flight commander, so I didn't just have the food service anymore. I also had the fitness, the lodging, libraries, mortuary affairs, base honor guard. I had a lot of business functions under me. And there was a problem with the food service in terms of the way they were accounting. And I was convinced that it should be this way. I looked at the regs, and it should be this way, and it's not working out the way it should be. So as the officer, I'm stepping into this situation and saying, okay, well, this is the direction that we need to go. Then I got with the contracting department, and the contracting department explained the error of my ways. And I needed to go back, explain to my bosses, this is why we need to make this change, this is what it does to the organization, this is what it's going to cause in terms of manpower and changing in materiel, but it's the right thing to do. As a leader, you have to be willing to recognize when you've made a mistake and not be beholden to the decision that you've made and say, I can't be wrong in this. Recognize that when another input comes in that shows that you've made an error, here comes that pivot. That pivot that says, I was incorrect, we need to go this other direction. So you have to be humble enough to recognize when your decision isn't the one that should be followed, there's another decision to be made, be willing to move that decision and move that milestone and take responsibility for the decisions that you've made. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
How do you distinguish between a leader and a follower? And the other question is, do we have both?
Absolutely. So how do we distinguish between a leader and a follower, and do we have both? If you are in an organization, you have both by the nature of it. And even if you're all equals, you're all equal partners, there's still going to be leadership and followership among them. So in any group of people, there are going to be leaders and followers. And how do you distinguish between them? I like to distinguish a leader from a tyrant or a dictator by saying that fear and love spectrum, a tyrant or dictator rules on the fear side of that equation. They find out what it is that you're afraid to lose. You're afraid to lose your income? Fine. You don't do this, you're getting fired. You're afraid to lose your free time? Well, you either do this, you're staying after work tonight. They find out what it is you're afraid of, and that's how they seek to get you motivated. The leader is the one that's looking for what's the highest best that we can do. You're going to do this because this is going to lead to growth for you. You're going to do this because this is going to provide a great outcome for that customer over there. It's a difference between riding the treetops in an airplane and saying, okay, I better be careful here at the very bottom, and what can I get away with without crashing this plane, versus soaring up in the clouds and going as high as you can go and fast as you can go. So a leader versus a tyrant, there's always going to be a need for leadership. The question is, will there be leadership when it's needed? So the leader is looking to raise people up to the highest they can go, but that tyrant is looking to make sure that people just follow the diktats and they're ruling by fear. And the followers need to recognize the difference. Because the followers, when they're dealing with a tyrant, they know it. You know, you look on social media, you look on the message boards of an organization, and the so-and-so's over here, nobody wants to work for him, he's a tyrant. We know who the bad leaders are, but some people can't do anything about that. They're stuck with those bad leaders. So again, if you're at the top of the organization and you recognize you got a bad leader below you, you need to listen to your people, and you need to make sure that you either train that person to be a better leader or find a better leader for those people. But there's always going to be leaders and followers, and it's important to recognize that the best leaders are also followers. You know, it's not a one or the other thing. And your best followers are leaders. So you've got a group of followers that are all equal to each other in terms of rank, but among them there's going to be those that want to do the right thing, that are going to call their people together and say, follow me, we're going to go follow this leader over here and do what he's saying we should do. The followers are leaders, and the leaders are followers. And even if you're at the very top of your organization, you're still going to be following somebody, and even if it's just God himself.
Well, that's what I was going to, I know you're spiritual, and it's a basic tenet of our spirituality, and maybe you can elaborate on, is in order to lead, you've got to learn to follow.
Absolutely. Like you said, from a faith standpoint, very much from a faith standpoint, you know, God sees what we do in private, and he sees what's in our heart. So when we say we're acting out of love for our people, but really acting out of love for ourselves, one, the people are going to notice that, and two, so is God. So if we are trying to live a good moral Christian life, and we are subject to a higher power, God himself, then we want to know what it is that God wants of us. We want to live up to that. And I'll tell you, when I talk about fear and love, on the fear side, I've seen studies, never counted myself, I'll admit, but I've seen studies that show that the Bible says, do not fear, thou shalt not fear, fear not, all those combinations of fear, 365 times. That's one for every day of the year. But what does it call us to do? It calls us to love. What is the greatest commandment? To love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That love and fear spectrum is biblical. That love and fear spectrum is built into us as emotional beings by the Creator who made us. And that love and fear spectrum is how we interact with other people. So that the love and fear that you're making decisions based on for your own life, recognize that that person next to you is using those same benchmarks to make their decisions. And you as a leader can find out what they love and fear. And you can try to react to them in love and grow them in love instead of trying to make them react in fear, which is a negative emotion. Anybody online?
Any other questions?
We got one. How can you recognize when people are ready for more responsibility or when they're not? And was that Apollo, right? That's I think I heard your name was Apollo. So Apollo, that's your job as a leader, is to recognize the readiness in your people. And just like you recognize in yourself when you're ready for more responsibility, you have to have that communication and that accompaniment with your people to recognize it in them as well. So you need to bring your people on. The reason that when you join the Army, you go through basic training, the reason even though I've gone through basic training in the Army and I go to the Air Force and I'm going through basic training again, is because you start at the beginning. And from that beginning come more trade schools, I'm going into this direction, so I need to be trained for this job, and I need this continuing education. And basically what you do is you lead people through the process. So someone who's starting at the very bottom of the process is someone that needs the basic level of training, needs to understand what the mission is, what their responsibility is for providing that mission, and then you recognize as they come along when they're ready for that next step. You don't tend to take people from the bottom and say, you should be a CEO now. You know, the movie Big, where basically he plays with toys and you say, okay, now you're a C-level executive with this organization. That doesn't happen in real life. What happens in real life is you as a leader, just as you recognize within yourself you're ready for more responsibility, you need to have that rapport with the people that report to you and the people that work for you to recognize that next step they're ready for that next step. And you try to keep them on those steps. You can compress the steps. I mean, you can say that this person's ready to be at level 5, so we're going to go 2, 3, 4, and 5 here just within a month or so. You can compress the steps, but you still want the steps. You don't want to go from 1 to 5. So it's recognizing simply that we've got a process for growing people in our organization. We've got a process for advancement in our organization, and we're going to make sure that people follow that process, and then we don't have to worry about whether or not they're ready for C-level responsibility. We're only worried whether or not they're ready for that next step. And as we train more people, as we recognize in ourselves our own training levels, we recognize in them the signs that we would recognize in ourselves that they're ready for that next level. But you also have to provide them as much responsibility as you as a leader think they're capable of having. And you do that really by trial and error, honestly. You give people as much responsibility as you think you can give them and allow them to fail. And when they fail and pick themselves up, they've learned something. You bring them into the office. You say, you failed in this, but this is why you failed. This is what you should learn from this. Let's move forward. And then next time they encounter that situation, they don't fail in that. They're going to fail in something else, but not that. And they build on that. And it's that process of accompaniment and communication that's going to allow you to recognize the responsibility and the role that people are prepared for in the next step. Does that sound good, Apollo? Thank you, sir. Do we have time for more questions, and are there any?
I got one more. So one question I want to ask you, and Christina made an excellent point. How do you know as a follower that you are ready to lead? Or is that something that, people that you're following can kind of give you that little reassurance? Like, for example, for me, my business, when I went to Penn State, I learned, I was leading people at the time, but I learned how to follow my coach through 5 days in that program. And when I was done, he said, okay, Marcus, you're ready to lead, go out because you have information I taught you, all that. So that comes from the people that they're leading you, or do you think that's something that as a follower, you can kind of get that innate ability to say, okay, I've learned enough, now it's time to try to become a leader myself?
So the question is, as a follower, how can you recognize when you're ready to be a leader? And as I mentioned a moment ago, even among followers, there tends to be leadership. There tends to be that person that everyone else looks to and says, this guy knows what's going on. And they listen to that person. So in a way, leadership begins with an innate understanding of your role as a leader where you are. You may not have been made a leader by the organization, but you've been made a leader by your peers. And the reason typically that you've been made a leader by your peers is, one, you know how to do things, but two, you do the right thing. And again, when you're dealing with peers, you could still have that tyrannical relationship where one of you is stronger than the others, and you're going to strong-arm the others, and you're going to have that tyrannical leadership, and if you don't do what I say that you should do, I'm going to hurt you. You can have that tyrannical relationship among followers, but the leader is the one who does the right thing. And the leader is the one that the others recognize is doing the right thing. And then you're ready for leadership. So as a follower, I would look around and say, well, am I a leader already? Honestly. Because leadership is one of those things that just kind of happens. You develop a following simply by doing the right thing. And in doing the right thing, people come to your side, whether it's friends, family, co-workers, whatever the case might be. You become a leader because others look to you for what is the right thing to do. And when you are looked to for what is the right thing to do, you can share with others, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. And that's where the leadership starts to flow out of you back to other people. So we've talked about some leadership today. And what we found is that leadership has some very universal principles. And those of us that talk about leadership talk a lot of the same themes. You heard a lot of the same themes today dealing with that personal improvement, that focus and devotion to the mission, that willingness to develop and build your people and give them responsibility. But the end of this is just the beginning. Because this is the time for us to simply have a conversation about leadership. You take those principles then and go out and build your leadership style, build your leadership principles. And one thing to recognize is that we are never done. You're never done learning. I love to ask people, can you be perfect? It's a serious question. Can you be perfect? And most people would say, no, I'm not a perfect person. I can't be perfect. That's true. But can you do something perfectly? Can you do one thing perfectly? And if the answer is yes, build on it. Take that one thing you can do perfectly and apply it. And apply it to something else until you can do something else perfectly and something else perfectly. That is a process of perfection that you can apply to your mission, that you can apply to your people, that you can lead by example as you perfect yourself. It's a process that'll never be done. But if it's a process that has never started, never will have a chance to grow within you. So that's that personal growth. Take something you can do perfectly and build on that. And you'll find that that process of perfection is a process of growth for you and for the people you serve.